what vulnerability has to do with leadership. So that being said, let's drop in and start talking about what vulnerability means first. So to me, vulnerability is being willing to be real, especially when that's uncomfortable, right? I know I've been in several work situations where I have something that I need to say, something that I need to express, and it's challenging because it's not necessarily something I think the other person wants to hear, but it's a necessary conversation so that we can move forward and be more connected as a team, and therefore get more of the desired results that we're looking for. So before we dive into what vulnerability has to do with leadership, I'm actually curious, Linda, Tony, and TA, what vulnerability means to each of you. So Linda, if you will kick us off.
Well,
please.
I was just watching actually a leadership inspiration where I talked about the art of being vulnerable and posing questions. And the fact that when you ask out of curiosity, you really deepen the relationship and you take it to an entirely different position. And so instead of being, I like to say, the coach who throws out the baseball bat and you grab it, and then the next person grabs it on top, and then on top, and on top, until you get to the top, and the one who gets the knob wins. It's a conversation. It's not a competition. And you really have to sink into your heart and be curious about the other person and really use questions to discover all sorts of wonderful things about them. And the other thing that goes with that is not being in your head while they answer the question. In other words, don't be asking the next question or posing what your response is to that answer, but rather listen and listen deeply to what they're saying, because then the next question plays off of that as opposed to being part of your agenda.
Got it. Yes, active listening. Listening is one of the most active things you can do. It's really taking in that whole person so that your next statement is a response. It's not a reaction or a planned strategic thing that you're trying to do. I love that.
Exactly, exactly. What I like to call the egocentric predicament. I'm more concerned about me than I am you. And so my question is more important than your answer. And we really have to break out of that and be curious.
Got it. And Tony, thank you. And Tony, I'm curious what vulnerability means to you and how you've seen that show up in your own life in a powerful way.
Thank you, Corey. You know, to me, vulnerability is where you move the group from a collection of me's to the we. Because the leader sets the tone. The leader gets to take the lead and show others how the climate's going to operate. And if people come into a climate thinking it's all like I'm in a competitive stance, I got to like be one up above everyone else, then that tends to predominate. Because once one person does that, everybody starts playing by those rules. So when the leader takes that vulnerable approach of having a real conversation, what he or she is really doing, in my opinion, is acknowledging what's real. The feelings, the insecurities, the doubts, and making all that okay so that people can feel safe. And so what vulnerability is to me is it's the key to having a climate where people feel safe, where they can bring their greatest resources to bear because they're not shutting down, they're opening up, and it leads to opening up of the heart.
Awesome. Thank you. TA, I'm curious what vulnerability means to you.
It's interesting, and I love listening to everyone else's perspective on what vulnerability is to them, because if you look it up in the dictionary, vulnerability actually has like all the negative connotations to it. It's weakness. It's all the stuff that Brene Brown has certainly taught us the opposite side of it. But I think for me, I had a real true moment of having to be vulnerable probably about, I think, 10, 11 years ago when I lost one of my companies and ended up going bankrupt. And lucky for me, when I went through all that, it wasn't really public, right?
Mm,
And so
mhm.
nobody really had to know about it. Nobody needed to know that Terry Ann had made a mistake and made, a series of mistakes where, ultimately my company had failed. It went bankrupt. And but I made the decision that through that failure, through those mistakes, that I could be vulnerable and
Mhm.
share where I was weak and share what my lessons were. And by doing that, the reality is it was a show of strength. It was a show of courage. And so I think vulnerability to me is the ability to understand that we have good and we have things that we're not so good at. And it's okay to shine a light on both of those. And that's why teams are so important. That's why, the average of 5 is so important, because where I am weak, you are strong, right? And it's only
Totally.
through sharing of those vulnerabilities that we really get to get in touch with where we are weak and where others are strong, and that yin and yang can actually happen.
Absolutely. It's where we can actually have our differences be our strengths, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've noticed in my own leadership with the teams that I'm on is as soon as I am willing to say, "Hey, I don't know how to do this. This is an idea I have, but I have no idea how that actually works." It creates cohesion, it creates connection, because now somebody else can step in and say, "Oh, well, I love doing that. I know how to do that. Let me take it over." And now we create more leaders, right? So now we're not the only leader. Now we empower others to take the leadership in the things that they're really good at. And that feels really amazing. So I'm curious now, what are some ways that we can bring vulnerability in as leaders to empower our teams? I'm sure you've all had many situations where you've been able to use vulnerability in a way that's created something amazing for you and your team and your clients. So I'd love to hear a story from each of you about a time where you were able to really be vulnerable and have it really pay off in a powerful way. We'll go the opposite direction this time. So TA, curious where you've used vulnerability and had it lead to a big breakthrough.
Um, I would say, I guess my claim to fame is I'm the inside out entrepreneur. So I like to focus on the inside before I focus on the outside in terms of entrepreneurship. So I would have to say that I show up quite regularly, in a vulnerable way with my tribe, with my people.
Hmm.
But I would say the most recent would be I had to cancel my bee retreat this year. COVID's really put a muck on things. And, my bee retreat is typically an in-person retreat where we house, 200 plus women in a sold out room. And it's all about teaching women how to put the mask on themselves and how to do self-leadership and all of this awesomeness. And, a couple months ago, throughout all this, I had thought, I'm going to do it online. I can do that. And then there was the technology side, and then there was the engagement side, and then there was all of this other stuff that was a little bit of an uphill battle for me because it was new, right? Like to host an online summit was new because I was really successful in doing in-person summits. I like to hug people and high five them and like run into the room with lots of energy. And I was like, how am I going to do that through a computer? And I sat with it. And to be really honest, I sat with it for a little bit too long because I kind of got stuck in my own way. And then I just was like, I can't. I just can't do this. I can't show up for these people. And I also just didn't feel it. The vibe wasn't there. And so I showed up on, through email and through a couple of videos and through some posts on social media to let people know that I canceled it. And I canceled it because my heart wasn't in it. I canceled it because I didn't know what I was doing, and I just wasn't willing to go half-assed into it. I needed to know and feel confident that I could give them that stellar experience that I had given them before. And it
Hmm.
was, I was writing it and my hands were shaking and I was crying halfway through and I was, there was all these emotions and I shared that in my post.
Hmm.
And the response was positive. I got lots of private messages from people, and I think it just reminds people. I think when you're in a leadership role or you're an entrepreneur, it's we're always everything's great. How are you today? I'm great.
Right?
Yes, we're not all great. I can't be freaking great every day. I mean, I maybe I could, but I haven't. Like there's moments of, doom and gloom, and then there's moments of happy. And, I was just telling Linda and Tony earlier that, if I had my choice today, I would go curl up on the couch, read a book because it's gray outside. And I'm like, nah, I don't, I don't want to be doing these things right now. But it's like, no, I can show up, but I can show up and be vulnerable. So I think that there's a positive that comes from sharing your truth with people.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
And Tony, I'm curious of an experience that you've had where you've been able to use vulnerability and see an amazing result at the end in your leadership.
Yeah, I've mentioned this to you once before, Corey, but I started out as a leader with the recognition that I had to get vulnerable because I had just started as a vice president for a new company and a new job. And within a week, we discovered that there was a new competitor who had stolen 3 of our top 5 accounts. And we had a clear path to bankruptcy and failure. And the president of the company didn't know what to do. And so I stepped in and said, well, we got to start a turnaround process. And I got the blessings of the board. But then I had to realize I didn't know anything about this business. I'd worked there for 4 days. And we had a blue collar workforce that was probably 35 or 40 people. I don't think any of them had, a couple of them had college degrees, but not many. And they were kind of bitter. It was not a happy place to work. And I just called a meeting and said, hey, I need to share with you guys what's happening. And we need to take control of our own destiny. We can just let it go. And then we're all unemployed, or we can work together. And I just found myself saying, and I'm going to have to depend on you guys to give me input because I'm going to take a lot of blind shots and I don't know my way. And I think that act of just being open and honest, it was amazing because after that conference, that news didn't discourage people. It actually seemed to raise the energy. It was empowering. Awesome. So, we did turn around that company and we ended up repositioning ourselves and basically winning more business with old clients by creating new services. So it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. But that was the case where the fears were so prevalent, what's going to happen here?
Yeah.
And so I think vulnerability is kind of also a willingness to acknowledge that you don't know what's happening. And you don't know what's going to be the path, and that by pulling people together, and our weaknesses become strengths, you find that there's doors that you never knew were there. So it creates an awareness of things that have been missed before.
Love that. Love the idea of vulnerability being able to lead to new opportunities, new perspectives that just were missed. I've noticed that that's absolutely true in my life as well. So yeah, thank you. And Linda, I'm curious of a story that you have where you've really been vulnerable and had it really pay off well.
Well, there are a couple. I will give you a story from the military, which is sort of a strange place to be vulnerable, especially as a woman leader. I had a team of gentlemen, all of them were enlisted, and we had a sergeant who tried to undermine me. He hated working for a woman. He very deliberately said, I will walk around the block before I ever salute you, ma'am. And
wow.
And I actually saw him and walked the other way so that he had to salute me. Oh, he was not happy. Anyway, he went on vacation, and I happened to go down to the mailroom, and the mail clerk said to me, ma'am, you have all of these snowflakes that you haven't turned in yet. Now, snowflakes were requests for information. We ran the human resources, the automated human resources for the 6 New England states. And I said, I don't have any. What do you mean you've got all these? He said, well, ma'am, and he showed me the list, and there were like 50 of them. And he said,
wow.
you're supposed to turn these in like every 3 days. Well, I went upstairs and I went into his desk, which I never would have done, but there they were, all in his desk. So
wow.
I brought together my team and I said, hey guys, we're all in trouble. I will take the brunt because I am the senior leader here, but we need to figure out a way that we can get through all 50 of these in 3 days and turn them all in. And what we're going to do, how are we going to do that? I ended up stepping in and actually coding and doing other things. So I became a part of the team as opposed to the leader. And I have to tell you, those guys had more respect for me because of that, and the fact that I was willing to step off my high horse and say, hey, we got to do this together. How do we do this? And then I said to them, what should we do with Sargent? And they said, can we transfer him? I said, you betcha. And I found a post like in outer bumfuck Alaska where we transferred him because he really wanted to go to Germany. He really wanted his Mercedes, and we transferred him to bumfuck Alaska. And the team, we all celebrated. We had a great time, and nothing ever got in our way afterwards. And I think they appreciated the fact that I didn't try to command them to get this done. Instead, it was like, we're in this together. How are we going to make this happen? So like Tony, it was a whole different way of doing business for the military. It wasn't a command situation. It was definitely an influence situation.
Awesome. Thank you.
Corey, I just want to add one thing. What I really am impressed
Please.
about with that story, and it's kind of like a little subtlety about vulnerability, but Linda's story allowed the rest of the team to acknowledge that this guy with the bad spirit was polluting their climate. And those are not conversations that people can really bring up.
Right.
But by Linda's being vulnerable about a problem, that this was able to come out on the side and be resolved in a way that was mutually beneficial to the spirit of the team.
Well, and also I don't think they felt before that they recognized the fact that he was a bad apple, but because he was a senior sergeant, it's like, I don't have any control over what happens to him. I have to live with this. So I think you're right, because I brought them together and said, let's do this together. It was like, so we have the power to make change. And we did.
Yeah. Well, I love that. We have the power to make change.
Right.
Right. Not I, but we.
Exactly.
And it takes all of us. Right.
Yeah.
I can't imagine having gotten all of that done by yourself in 3 days.
No.
Like, that's an insane amount of work. So,
Yeah.
so it legitimately is a we, and there's something that's really important when we get into a team where everyone feels the we. They don't just hear the we, they feel that they're part of that team and that everybody's together.
Exactly.
And I want to share something I've learned. So much of the time I'm a contractor. I come in and I do specific things and help out with very specific things in projects, at least I have up to this point. And much of the time, I would, if I made a mistake, I would never let anyone know, and I would just work and fix it before anyone could tell. And I realized how much of a detriment that was, because it created so much stress for me trying to figure out this thing when legitimately I could have a 5 or 10 minute conversation with someone else, clear the problem and get it done better and faster. And so what I realized in the past year was, when I make a mistake, I own it immediately with whichever team, whoever I need to talk to about it. And then we can have a conversation to solve something. Because as a leader myself, when I hire others to do things, we're going to make mistakes. We're human, right? Like that's just part of life. But when we know, now we can do something else. We can make and find a solution for that mistake that was made, instead of pretending that it didn't happen.
Exactly.
Right? Or being that leader, like, nope, I didn't say that. I've been that leader, and I've had that leadership above me, and it sucks in both spaces. Right? So now if I'm like, yeah, you know what? I fucked up royally. My bad. How do we fix it? Then all of a sudden everyone's in the conversation, and we're able to find, like Tony said, a new perspective that we wouldn't have seen before. And we get into that space of being us and being together. And that's always been fascinating to me, right? I've watched it happen to other people, like, wow, how did that work? Until I actually experienced it myself.
Right. Yeah.
So now I want to go through one more round, and I would love to hear just one tip or tool something that everyone who's listening right now can do to bring leadership, or excuse me, to bring vulnerability into their leadership in a way that's going to empower them and their team. So Linda, I would love to have you start us off with a tip, tool, or technique that the folks at home can use to really bring vulnerability powerfully into their leadership.
Well, vulnerability means dropping into your heart. So it's recognizing the fact, am I here or am I here? And I like to say pause.
Mm-hmm.
Stop, think about what you're doing, feel it, and then speak. And of course, you know, my favorite two words are just curious. When you ask those kinds of questions, it takes you out of your headspace and into your heart, and it allows you to bring in what it is that the other person needs to give you. And if you ask that question, just curious, blah, 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 pause. Don't try to answer it. Don't try to ask another question. Give them the opportunity to truly answer that question. Because if it's the powerful question you think it is, then it's going to take them a moment to bring their answer together in such a way that they want to deliver it to you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Pause and wait. Slow the F down. I love it. Awesome. Thank you. And Tony, what is a tip, tool, or technique you have to share with the folks at home to bring vulnerability into leadership in a powerful way?
I'm just reflecting on some of the stories that we were talking about and how when these shifts happen with the leaders, what struck me that really was happening was people were in a situation where suddenly their efforts mattered. And to me, that's a really big dynamic in leadership is when people feel they matter, they do better work and they contribute more. And so to me, what a leader can do if they're not already having any kind of simple coaching conversations is to start simple with things like what matters to you. Because when people talk about what matters to them, they start to feel they matter. And then a real simple segue from that is to have like a team meeting where you ask review what the goals are and say what's working in our efforts so far, what's not working, and what can we do to make what's not working work? Because all of a sudden it's offering those people a chance to matter and to contribute how it looks to them. And that creates that sense of we that is really the heart of the vulnerability in work.
Right.
Absolutely. I love that. I think I would have been much better in the workplace at keeping a job had I had leaders that actually that offered a space for me to share different ideas. And that's, there's a fun, especially as a millennial where, the statistics are showing that most of the millennial generation is not feeling appreciated by their leadership, which is costing, 7 to 8 times the productivity and innovation that millennials can bring when they feel really valued. So as a leader, making sure that the youngsters on the team are feeling valued, feeling like they're part of the team, that they matter, it'll take your company to places you can't even imagine, right? Imagine what your company could do with 7 times more innovation or 8 times more agility when you unlock those millennials, right?
Yeah.
So thank you, Tony. And PA, what is a tip, tool, or technique you have to share with the folks at home that will help them unlock the power of vulnerability in their leadership?
I think I'll keep it simple. I think owners, CEOs, leaders, entrepreneurs, they need to continuously check their ego at the door. I think it's the Achilles heel of, most leaders. It's the one thing that we struggle with because, we invariably have been taught somewhere along the line that we're supposed to know it all. And that, not knowing it all means that we're not a good leader. And so I think by not checking your ego at the door, you're continuously overestimating your performance, how great of a leader you are, your capabilities in terms of how you show up for your clients or your competitors. And so I think rather than inflate, ask. So check your ego at the door. And, there's things out there, they 360 reports, asking good questions to people who, report to you. So it's not so much doing performance reports on your people, but it's also, having performance reports done on yourself and finding out, like, how do I show up as a leader? Am I doing my job to the best of my ability, and being open to the feedback that you're going to receive? Because regardless of how far you've come in your career, there's still so much further you can go. Being a CEO, being a leader, being a manager is not a destination. It's a journey. And there's still so much further to go. And I think that, you need to check your ego at the door to get going on that journey.
And Corey, Terry, and you brought us something with check your ego. There's something else to check at the door. That's your perfectionism. Because
Yes.
when as a leader you think you're perfect or you need to be perfect, that vulnerability is really hard to get through to. And so checking that with your ego makes it easier for you to be vulnerable, because you're willing to accept that you're human and that you make mistakes. And it's okay. We can work on those together as a team. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, and I think we're all doing the best we can at the moment that we're doing it. And tomorrow I might know something a little bit different and I might be just that much better. But today I'm doing the best I can. And so I think it's striving for the best, but not perfection, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love it. So we got 3 pretty amazing tips. Pause and wait for a response. Include your team, give them a forum where they can tell you what's working, what's not working, and how do we make what's not working work. And check your ego and ask questions. 3 powerful tips that will actually help you awaken the leadership in yourself. And one other piece I'm going to add. Remember that you are not the only leader on your team. Every time you put yourself, at least I can speak from my own experience, every time I'm the only leader, the project fails. Every time I give away that leadership, it grows into something beyond what I ever even imagined possible. Everyone on the team is a leader, right? That's why we all put together this program, Awaken the Leader. First, awaken the leader in you, so you can awaken the leader in your team, and you can get results that are far beyond what you can imagine right now. It's coming up in January. We'll be doing more lives every week. This week especially, you get 2, which is going to be fun. So we'll be back on Friday. And we're just going to share some cool things that are going to help you, that we're excited about, and that we're going to be teaching about. So do we have any closing thoughts, Linda, Tony, or TA, before we wrap up today?
Now, just to remind them, actually, there are 3 videos this week, because you
Yes.
get me on Thursday and you get another one of us on Friday. So watch for both of those.
Oh, wow.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Tony, TA, any parting thoughts?
The last parting thought I'll share is just like I've sum up the whole conversation about how vulnerability is the key to where you take your team from a group of me's to a single collective we.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
TA, any final thoughts from you today?
No, I think, my challenge to everyone is to take notes. If you're watching the replay, take notes of what you've learned from this and put it into action. We can read 100 books this year and they're just books and it's just knowledge stuck in our head. But unless you take this and you actually do something with it, transformation does not happen. So take some action today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Linda, Tony, and TA, for being here. I always love connecting with the 3 of you. You're 3 of my favorite leaders. Thank you, everyone who is watching at home. I'd love to hear how you can implement this and what it's going to do to help you, the results that you see. And I'm excited to see you all again on Friday. So thank you so
Ciao.
much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Corey.
Bye.